Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every life when the heart is so heavy, so full of unspoken sorrow, that words seem too fragile to carry the weight. In those moments, we feel the sharp ache of what someone else did, the betrayal, the cruelty, the abandonment, the injustice. And when that ache settles deep in the soul, we find ourselves haunted by a single thought: how do I ever forgive what I cannot forget? The truth is, there are some wounds that memory refuses to release. They sit in the corners of our minds, and they come alive in the quiet of night, in the stillness of reflection, in the unexpected triggers of daily life. And we cry out not because we are weak, but because we have carried it so long and so silently. So many believe forgiveness must come when the pain is gone, when the heart has healed, when justice has been served. But forgiveness, true forgiveness, begins not in the absence of pain, but in the presence of surrender. You don't forgive because you feel like it. You don't forgive because it makes sense. You forgive because you no longer want to be chained to what someone else did. You forgive because you've come to the end of yourself and realize, this burden is too heavy, this grief too deep, this memory too cruel to carry alone. And in that place of complete surrender, a divine exchange begins. It is not a transaction of logic. It is not an agreement of fairness. It is the mystery of grace. You may think forgiveness is about the other person, what they did, what they said, what they failed to do. But forgiveness is first and foremost about your own soul. That person may never say sorry. They may never see their wrong. They may never change. And yet, you are the one who lies awake at night, rehearsing the moment, reliving the wound, replaying the words. Bitterness does not wait for an invitation. It seeps in like water through cracked glass, and before you know it, it fills every part of your being. Your laughter becomes guarded. Your joy becomes shallow. Your peace becomes distant, and all because of something you didn't choose, but now live with every day. There is something you must understand. Forgiveness does not deny the pain. It does not excuse the offense. It does not pretend it never happened. Forgiveness is not about pretending. It's about releasing. It is not a declaration that what happened was right. It is the recognition that holding on to the offense is slowly destroying you. The human heart was not created to harbor unforgiveness. It corrodes the spirit. It hardens the soul. It distances you from others, from joy, and often, without you realizing, from the gentle voice of God. And so forgiveness becomes a form of worship. It is the lifting of a burden you cannot carry to the one who says, "Cast it on me." It takes a mighty strength to say, "I forgive," when the wound is still bleeding. But that strength is not your own. It comes from a place deeper than resolve. It comes from a well that does not run dry, from a divine source that understands betrayal, understands injustice, understands the anguish of being wounded and misunderstood. When you choose to forgive, not from emotion, not from obligation, but from that sacred place of surrender, something begins to shift in the spiritual realm. You may not feel it immediately. You may still cry. You may still struggle, but heaven begins to move on your behalf. Forgiveness is not a moment. It is a process, a decision that must be made again and again, sometimes every hour. It is saying, "Today I choose to release them," and tomorrow, when the memory returns, saying it again. Each time you release, each time you surrender, your soul becomes a little lighter. The grip of the past becomes a little looser, and slowly the poison of resentment is replaced by something holy, not forgetfulness, but freedom. Not amnesia, but peace, not justice, but mercy. You may say, "But they don't deserve it." And you're right, they probably don't, but forgiveness was never about what they deserve. It's about what you need. And you, dear soul, you need to breathe again. You need to live again. You need to walk free of the chains that memory has wrapped around your heart. You need to remember who you were before that pain shaped your identity. You are not what happened to you. You are not the sum of your suffering. You are beloved. You are chosen. You are carried. And forgiveness is the doorway back to that truth. There are prisons that no eye can see, chains that make no sound, shackles that leave no visible scars. These are the unseen weights that lie deep within the soul, weights we carry from the hurts we've endured, the betrayals we never expected, the abandonment we never chose, and the words that were spoken over us that cut deeper than any blade. These are the things that bind us in silence, the quiet griefs that shape our thoughts, our choices, our responses to life and love. We wake up, dress ourselves, go about our day, and from the outside we look whole. We smile, we serve, we function, but inside, something remains unresolved. And though we try to move forward, there is something in us that won't let us go free. You see, the chains that bind us are often invisible. They are made of memories and emotions, of guilt and shame, of fear and anger. They come from the times we were wronged and never got closure, from the voices that said we were not enough, from the people who promised to stay and walked away instead. They come from moments we've buried so deep that we no longer speak of them, but they still speak to us, in our relationships, in our reactions, in our retreat from vulnerability. We wonder why we're quick to withdraw, quick to build walls, slow to trust, always second, guessing whether we're truly loved or truly safe, and often it's because something in us is still bound. Bitterness rarely introduces itself with a loud knock. It creeps in slowly, like a fog, settling in the corners of your heart until you can no longer remember what it felt like to live without it. It changes the way you see people. It changes the way you see yourself. It tells you that holding on to the offense is power when really it's poison. It convinces you that you're protecting your heart when really you're building a cage around it. Bitterness blinds the eyes of the soul. And what's worse, it often disguises itself as righteousness, as strength, as justice. But true justice doesn't live in resentment. It lives in truth, and truth, dear heart, is that you were never meant to carry the burden of someone else's sin against you. The hardest part about these invisible chains is that they feel justified. You were hurt, and rightly so. You didn't ask for this pain. You didn't cause it. You didn't deserve it. And the mind, in its desperate attempt to protect itself, begins to build a narrative. I can't let this go. I won't forget what they did. If I forgive, it's like saying it didn't matter. But holding on doesn't bring justice. It brings torment. The pain doesn't lessen. It festers. The offense doesn't fade. It grows larger in your eyes. And in time, the chain becomes so familiar, so natural, you forget what life felt like without it. We begin to identify with the pain. We rehearse the wound like a sacred script. We relive the moment not because we want to, but because we haven't learned how to release it. And yet, deep inside, we know this is not the way we were meant to live. We were made for peace. We were made for freedom. We were made to love and be loved without fear. But the invisible chains of unforgiveness and bitterness distort that design. They keep us locked in a past that we cannot change and blind us to the healing that waits on the other side of surrender. And surrender is what it requires, not denial, not suppression, not pretending, but surrender, a laying down of our right to be angry, our right to hold a grudge, our right to nurse the wound. And oh, how hard that is. Because those rights feel like justice, they feel like safety, but they are the very things keeping us in bondage. They are the bars on the windows of our heart. They are the weight around our spirit. The invisible chains must be broken, not by our own striving, but by a decision to let grace in, to let love in, to let healing begin. That decision isn't easy and it isn't quick. It is painful and raw and often lonely. But it is the only path to freedom. So many carry the pain like it is their identity. They have lived with the betrayal so long, they no longer know who they are without it. They wear the hurt like a cloak, not because they want to, but because they don't know how to take it off. But there is another way. There is a deeper freedom, a holy release that does not require forgetting, but requires releasing. The chains may not rattle, but they are real. The prison may not have walls, but it is confining. And no one else may see it, but you feel it every single day. There is a deep misconception hidden in the human heart, that forgiveness must mean forgetting, that to truly move on we must erase the memory, discard the image, pretend the past never happened. But memory does not work like that. The brain does not selectively delete. The soul does not easily forget moments that shattered it, especially when the pain was personal, when the betrayal came from someone trusted, when the wound cut into the core of your identity. You remember the sound of their voice, the weight of their words, the exact moment the world shifted beneath your feet. You remember because you lived it. You remember because it marked you. You remember because it mattered. And yet, forgiveness is still possible, not because you forget, but because you choose to no longer let the memory dictate your story. There is something holy that happens when the memory remains, but the sting begins to fade. It is not amnesia, it is redemption. It is the work of something greater than human strength. It is grace transforming the sharpness of the past into a testimony of survival, of freedom, of healing. What was once a source of torment becomes a marker of God's mercy, that you made it through, that you're not who you used to be, that pain did not have the final word. We often wait for the pain to disappear before we forgive. We tell ourselves that once we stop crying, once we stop thinking about it, once it stops hurting, then we'll let it go, but it doesn't work that way. The pain begins to release its grip only after the heart makes the choice to forgive. Forgiveness is not the fruit of healing, it is the root of it, and that's what makes it so difficult. You may still feel the ache, still flinch at the memory, still question how it all happened. And yet, somewhere in the middle of that emotional chaos, you reach a point where you say, I can't keep living under the weight of what they did. I choose to release them, not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace. The memory might still come to you uninvited. At the most inconvenient times, in the quiet before sleep, in a moment of joy, during a conversation that has nothing to do with your past. A scent, a voice, a scene. Suddenly you're back in that place again. And it's easy to believe that if the memory is still alive, forgiveness hasn't truly happened. But that is not true. Forgiveness doesn't erase memory, it removes the venom. The wound may have scarred, but it no longer bleeds. And slowly, you begin to see the memory differently, not as a source of torment, but as a symbol of the strength it took to survive, not as a prison, but as a pathway to compassion, for yourself, and even for the one who caused the pain. It is not weakness to remember, it is not failure to feel. Forgiveness does not demand emotional numbness. It demands a courageous heart willing to look at the pain and say, you no longer get to rule me. You can remember and still be free. You can revisit the past and no longer be chained to it. That is the power of true forgiveness. It breaks the spiritual and emotional connection to what once tried to destroy you. You no longer give your power away every time the thought returns. You no longer rehearse revenge or bitterness or sorrow. Instead, you breathe. You let the thought pass through you like a wave that no longer knocks you down. There is something sacred about walking through memory with mercy, about going back through the dark halls of your history, hand in hand with grace, and realizing that you are no longer the same person who lived that pain. You are wiser, stronger, softer even, because somehow, through it all, your heart didn't turn to stone. Somehow, though you had every reason to harden, you chose love, and that love, costly as it is, has set you free. You do not need to forget in order to forgive. You do not need to erase the chapter to write a new one. Some of the most powerful stories are written not in spite of the past, but because of it. When you forgive what you still remember, when you release what once held you hostage, you reclaim your power. You stand in the very place of your pain and declare that grace is greater, that peace is possible, that joy can live again, And though the memory lingers, it no longer defines you. It becomes something else entirely, a reminder of what grace can do with even the most broken pieces. There is a sacred place, a quiet place, where healing begins, not in noise, not in the chaos of doing, not in the striving to fix ourselves or make sense of everything that's happened. It happens in the presence of love. Not the fleeting kind, not the conditional kind, not the kind that walks away when it's inconvenient, but the eternal, unchanging, ever-reaching love that sees every broken piece, every hidden tear, every unspoken word, and draws near anyway. That kind of love doesn't wait for you to get it all together. It doesn't ask you to pretend. It doesn't scold your weakness or rush your grief. It simply comes close and stays, and in that holy presence, something soft begins to stir, something that couldn't move before. You may have been locked in bitterness, wrapped in pain so tightly you couldn't breathe, paralyzed by memories you didn't ask for. You may have tried to forgive 1,000 times, only to feel the sting again and wonder, what's wrong with me? Why can't I let this go? But the human heart cannot release what it still feels the need to protect, and the human soul cannot heal in the absence of safety. True healing begins where love is present, and love cannot be forced. It must be encountered. So many have tried to will their way to forgiveness. They grit their teeth, say the words, go through the motions, but deep inside, something is still guarded, something is still hurting. Forgiveness isn't a box you check. It's not a line you cross just once. It is something sacred that happens when the soul meets perfect love, and the wall begins to fall. Because in the presence of that love, you realize you are held. You are seen, you are safe, and for the first time you do not have to defend yourself against the past. You do not have to armor up. You can simply be, and in that place tears come, not because you are weak, but because you finally feel strong enough to feel. That presence is not loud. It does not shout over your pain. It whispers in the silence. It waits in the stillness. It meets you in the dark, in the loneliest hours of the night, when no one else knows what you're carrying. It is there in the breath between sobs, in the quiet moments when your heart can barely utter a prayer, when you say, I can't do this anymore, and feel nothing in return, yet somehow still feel held. That is where healing begins. Not when the pain is gone, but when love shows up in the middle of it and says, I'm not going anywhere. You do not heal by punishing yourself. You do not heal by pretending it didn't matter. You do not heal by stuffing it down until it disappears. You heal when you bring the pain into the light of that love, when you stop hiding it, when you stop dressing it up, when you stop trying to be brave and just let yourself be broken. Because the presence of love doesn't flinch at brokenness. It is drawn to it. It is the very place where restoration begins. There's a kind of tenderness that only the wounded know, a softness that comes after the tears, a compassion that grows only in the soil of deep sorrow, and it is in that soil that love does its finest work. It reaches into the raw, unspoken places and says, even this belongs to me. Even this is not beyond my touch. And when you believe that, truly believe it, not just in your mind but in your spirit, something begins to unravel, the anger, the resentment, the fear, the control, it all begins to melt in the warmth of that presence. And forgiveness, which once seemed impossible, begins to take root. Forgiveness doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from yielding deeper. It is not an act of strength, but of trust, trusting that love is enough, that you are not alone in the process, that even when you can't see how, something beautiful is being formed in the hidden places. Forgiveness is birthed in the space where love holds what you cannot carry. It does not mean the past disappears. It means the weight of it is no longer yours alone. When you stop trying to heal by yourself, when you stop demanding justice before peace or closure before release, When you let love be enough, something begins to shift. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's gentle, subtle, but it is real, a release, a loosening, a softening. You may not even recognize it at first, but one day you'll look back and realize the memory is still there, but it no longer breaks you. The name is still familiar, but it no longer stings. The wound is still part of your story, but it no longer defines your worth. And all of that began, not with forgetting, not with striving, but with being held in the presence of love and allowing that love to do what only it can.